We get prepared for the next panel. We're going to shift from the salty waters of the oceans to the fresh waters. 3% is not a terribly high number, but it's of great consequence to the web of life and to us humans. And Catherine Vachon is going to commandeer this panel. Catherine has a very interesting background with her family working in canoe making and kayaking, and her own personal background around ocean issues and scuba diving. But she is now actually the CEO of OneDrop, and OneDrop, many of you will know, is the organization, the foundation that was set up by Cirque du Soleil that's really delivering some rather heroic water systems and sanitation systems on a number of continents across the planet. But if that's not an interesting enough background with Catherine, she also was an advisor to the Prime Minister of Canada and a senior policy advisor to the Department of Foreign Affairs, along with things like helping commandeer the 2010 Winter Olympics in Canada. But I'll let her make the shift to this saltwater to freshwater and introduce the panel. Catherine?
Thank you very much, Randy. OneDrop basically is an organization that delivers very unique water access and management programs on 3 continents. But more than just providing access to water and sanitation, I mean, the greatest issue that our sector faces certainly is sustainability. There's anywhere between 30 and 75% of all the water and sanitation programs that are delivered worldwide that will fail within 2 years of being implemented. So quickly, OneDrop had to come up with a model that would help overcome the sustainability challenge. And that model is called the ABC of sustainability. So not only do we provide access to water and sanitation, but we also provide behavior change using the arts, culture, entertainment. So that allows us to speak to communities from people who are literate to illiterate, the young and the old, and address an entire community all at once. And it's very similar to the work that you're doing here. So it would be an interesting connection to make later. And the third component of what we deliver is the C, is the capital. So we basically help the communities where we work transform the water into revenue-generating activities, so that by the time that OneDrop leaves, after 5 or 6 years of implementation, the communities had enough resources, enough wealth, and enough ownership of the infrastructure to maintain it forever. Now, the reason why we're here today is certainly because it's hard to talk about water or talk about energy without talking about water. Decisions made into one sector definitely impact the other. They are intricately linked together. And someone who actually saw, and we talk. I mean, we've talked yesterday and we talked today, and we will in the next few days talk about the energy crisis and the fact that in a little bit more than 100 years we're going to run out of oil, and 200 years we're going to run out of gas. But the fact is that we're running out of water right now. And I think someone who's seen it firsthand, because it happened in his backyard, is Peter McBride, who is an amazing award-winning filmmaker, photographer, water expert. So Peter, we have about 30 minutes, a little bit less now, to leave the audience with a powerful message and about what's actually happening. And so I don't know if you want to share some of your thoughts.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks for your work. Thanks for all coming out. Just to give you a little background on what I do, I started as a photographer doing work mostly for National Geographic. I've had the privilege to travel to over 70 countries, and I started out doing adventures, going to the far-flung corners of the planet. And after a little while, I wanted to do a story that's a little closer to home. And about 5 years ago, I followed what I call my backyard river. I grew up here in the Roaring Fork Valley, and the Colorado River starts in the Rocky Mountains here and flows all the way to the Sea of Cortez, or it used to. It ran there for 6 million years. I followed that river, source to sea. I've now followed it about 3 times, and was amazed 4 years ago when I came to the U.S.-Mexican border just south of it and saw the Colorado River go completely dry. And that just perplexed me beyond my comprehension. Colorado River ran to the sea for 6 million years. Not a single drop of it reached the sea since 1998. It's been drying up since the 60s, basically. And I think what's so significant about that is that rivers really embody so much of fresh water as a whole. It supports us in recreation, agriculture, industry, and basically maybe our well-being. So I started following rivers all over. I've now done about, I think, 5 source-to-sea rivers. I just completed a source-to-sea from 18,000 feet in the Garhwal of the Himalaya and followed the sacred river, the Ganges, all the way to the sea. The Ganges River supports water for 400 million people in India, arguably one of the most contaminated rivers in the world, believed to be by 1 billion Hindus sacred, an embodiment of Lord Shiva and the goddess Ganga. And what is so remarkable to me is not only a river on the other side of the world that is loved and hugged daily by so many people, embraced, face on, and it's getting terribly overused and abused, revered and reviled, as many like to say. Yet at the same time, in my backyard, in a river that is famous in the world, worldwide for the Grand Canyon, so many of us turn our backs to it, in part because we just think water is just going to keep flowing. Our taps are going to keep running. And the reality is they're not. It's an issue everywhere, whether you're impoverished in India or whether you live in Aspen, Colorado, or anywhere in the Southwest, or even in the U.S., because every bit of lettuce that comes commercially from in the U.S. in our grocery stores comes from Colorado River water. It's all raised in winter lettuce. Baby spinach in January comes from the Colorado River. And Lake Mead, one of the largest reservoirs on the Colorado River, built by Hoover Dam, 1935, has now reached its all-time record low, 39% full. So we have this mentality that water is, as long as our taps flow, no big deal. We'll just keep turning the sprinklers on. We'll just keep doing business as usual, and we're basically just eroding, just detonating our reservoirs, our bank account of water. And what amazes me is nobody's really paying that close attention. A lot of people banging the drum, but it seems to be one of these issues that goes very heavily ignored. And now wherever I go, whether it's locally or abroad, I'm seeing the issue everywhere. Water, water, water. Fresh water is just vanishing. What I was going to do, though, is show you a 2-minute little video that I recently did, because I want to make you aware that although we're in an extreme, I would call it approaching a very serious crisis on fresh water, particularly around rivers, but groundwater as well, it feels like, what can we do? It's such a big challenge, and it's how do I make a difference? Sure, I can turn my sprinklers down or use less, but I think a lot of it is just, I know it's used, the phrase is used a lot, but awareness and just being aware of what is happening and getting your voice out there. And the video that I'm about to show you is an example of that, because the Colorado River, although it hasn't reached the ocean continuously for a long time, it did this spring. And this video is about a pulse flow that was an 8-week experimental pulse flow that is mainly due because a lot of people were concerned and got together, and the hands of many, as the video will explain, lifted the gates of the last dam and enabled the Colorado River to actually kiss the sea of the Sea of Cortez this last May for the first time in a very long time. It was temporary, it's experimental. I was one of 3 people that took a paddleboard the entire length of it to see it. So I know it a little more closely than I maybe wanted to. So the angry mosquitoes that are down there waiting for a fool like us, fools like us to go down there, were extraordinary. A couple words before I move on to Bob and American Rivers. There have been many people often ask me, and I think it's very symbolic on the dilemma we're dealing with water and fresh water. Is I recently did a radio interview here, and they said, well, so the Colorado River doesn't reach the sea anymore, so who cares? Big deal if the river dries up. And I went on to give my usual answers. Well, the freshwater interface with saltwater creates estuaries, it creates habitat, it creates biodiversity that helps support us. I go on the list. That usually goes right over people's heads. And I felt like just saying, listen, well, what happened if the river in your backyard dried up? And I think that is part of the dilemma, and Bob can get onto this, is we often see our watersheds in our just immediate vicinity. We don't look downstream, and all of these systems are very heavily connected. And so I think taking a paddleboard mission across this delta, many say was, well, that's so crazy. Why would you let water go down into Mexico and California's record drought, etc. I think it's just very symbolic of what we can do. That water was less than 1% of the Colorado River. It was Mexico's water, and it wasn't taken from anyone else. I think there is potentially enough water in our systems if we use it wisely. And with that, we'll move on to Bob. You're gonna do
Yeah, sure. Yes, for those who don't know Bob Urban, who's the CEO of the American Rivers Association. He's been 30 years in the environmental field. He's a wildlife lawyer by training. He's been now 3 years at the helm of the American Rivers Association and previously worked for WWF, several nature conservancy organizations, as well as the United States Senate. Over to you.
Well, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here. This is a great event. And it's especially nice to be sitting next to my friend Pete McBride. Pete is truly one of the world's great filmmakers and photographers. He did a film for American Rivers last year when we named the Colorado River America's most endangered river. It's the film called I Am Red. It's won numerous awards. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to go to his website and watch it, or go to americanrivers.org and watch it. It'll bring tears to your eyes. It's that powerful. American Rivers is a national conservation river advocacy organization. We were actually founded in Denver in 1973. I believe Sally Ranney was actually there at the creation. She worked for the Wilderness Society where the meeting was held. I've done the math. She must have been about 12 years old, the youngest employee of the Wilderness Society. But it's always nice to be back home in Colorado. As I said, we named the Colorado River the most endangered river last year, and this year we named 3 tributaries of the Colorado, the Upper Colorado, the White River, and the Gila River on our America's Most Endangered Rivers list. But this year we named the San Joaquin in California as America's Most Endangered River. And we did that not because of the drought. The drought is just a symptom of decades of mismanagement of a river that literally is running dry. And so each year we try to focus attention on rivers that are under threat and rivers where things can be done now to actually bring them back. And we really are facing a crisis for rivers and for fresh water around the world and here in the United States. Just last weekend, people in Toledo, Ohio were told for 2 days they could not use water for any purpose. Katie Russo is one of our staff members who's based in Toledo, Ohio. She and her family were directly affected by this. She's written a blog about it on our website. And you'll recall a few months ago, Charleston, West Virginia, had a similar water ban when there was a spill of toxic chemicals into the Kanawha River. We have mistreated our rivers throughout our history and continue to do so in many ways, and climate change is affecting this. In Toledo, the reason the ban went into effect was because of a toxic algal bloom in Lake Erie. That results from polluted runoff from cities and from farms. And as we see more storms and more intense storms, we see more of that runoff occurring, and we're going to see more events like this unless we take steps to address the problem of polluted runoff, unless we take steps to address the problem of climate change. And if we don't address climate change and our rivers, we're really missing the boat, no pun intended. Because the fact is that our rivers are one of our best defenses against climate change. They provide critical linkage for wildlife to move in response to a change in climate. And addressing our rivers, restoring our rivers to their natural state is critical. But we're doing all of this in a climate of political paralysis, as you've heard a lot about today and yesterday as well. The fact is that even though we have a crisis for our rivers, a crisis for fresh water, we seem to lack the political will to do something about it. Right now, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the Corps of Engineers are working together to finalize a rule that will restore Clean Water Act protection to virtually all waters of the United States, particularly headwater streams and wetlands. This is something that is desperately needed. It's needed because we have to correct another bad Supreme Court ruling of a few years ago. We need to get this protection back, and yet it's being opposed at every step of the way by the oil and gas industry, by the home builders, by the Farm Bureau, and by the politicians that they've spent good money for. And so unless the American citizens stand up and comment on this rule, tell the EPA and the Corps of Engineers that we support this, that we want to see all waters protected, this rule will be in trouble. And so that's critical as well. So there are a lot of challenges ahead, but I want to share a couple of reasons for hope. Pete's film is an eloquent reason for hope. And what he said a few moments ago, that if we have enough sense that these rivers, we can bring these rivers back without a tremendous amount of effort in many cases. And I've seen that as I travel around the country. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was in Petersburg, Virginia on the Appomattox River, where my organization has worked with the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Virginia Fish and Game Agency to take out a 100-year-old dam, the Harville Dam on the Appomattox River. And as soon as the first breach was in that dam, the small, insignificant breach that was allowing the water to flow over it, there were baby American eels literally ready to swim up that one trickle of water. If you want to see it, go to American River's Facebook page. The video is there. It's amazing. And 3 years ago, when I became president of American Rivers, I went out to the Elwha River in Washington State on the Olympic Peninsula, where we had been working with partners like the Clallam tribe and with the federal agencies to take out 2 large dams on the Elwha River and restore 70 miles of a 75-mile river for salmon habitat. This is a river that had been blocked for 100 years for salmon to go upstream and spawn beyond that lower 5 miles. And as I stood on top of the Elwha Dam that day, before all the ceremonies commemorating the event took place and before the dam came out, I looked down, and at the base of the dam, I could literally see salmon bumping up against the concrete of the dam. They were just waiting for us to have the sense and the foresight to take that dam out. And now that that dam is out, there are salmon spawning where they haven't spawned for over 100 years. They knew where to go, even though it had been that long since their ancestors had been going there. These are the kinds of things that give me hope, because what it tells me is that no matter how much we've damaged our rivers, the river is still there. And if we have the sense and the foresight to restore it, to take out the dams, to clean up the pollution, the river will come back with all of the life that's in it. And when that happens, our lives come back as well. So I am very, very hopeful, even though we have many challenges ahead. Thank you.
If I speak from experience, I mean, when One Job goes into developing countries and before we even begin implementing a program, we need to have both the government, the private sector, the social sector coming together to make this happen and to make this work. And when I listen to you, I see that people are very much working in silos, government, private sector, and so on. Where do they convene? How do we bring these sectors together to collaborate?
They actually convene on the river. And we have a great slogan at American Rivers. It's "Rivers connect us," and it's really true. They connect us in so many ways. And for any of these things to happen, all of these different interests have to come together. I'll give you a great example in Rockingham, North Carolina, this little community near the South Carolina border. We worked there for over 10 years with first on a federal relicensing of a big hydroelectric dam. Then we worked with the community to take out an old obsolete dam. And then we worked with the community to create a new blue trail, which is a paddle trail with 100 acres of greenway around it, which has become an engine to revitalize this community that lost thousands of jobs when 7 textile mills closed years ago. And by working with the community, by working with the federal and state agencies, by working with partner groups in that area, all of those interests have to come together to make that happen. So I think it's the same in the U.S. as it is in the developing world also.
I'll add one point. To give you an example of just how challenging some of these working on river situations are, the reason this post flow happened on the Colorado is called Minute 319. It's in addition to the Colorado Compact, which is called the Law of the River, written in 1922. It's the first of its kind. It's the first binational agreement treaty to bring water back to the environment. There's 260 rivers in the world that cross international boundaries, and this is the first time countries have actually worked together to bring back something not just for industry and people, but for the environment too. And so it can be an uphill slog, but the fact that that happened in 2014 on the Colorado River with basically our second decade of drought is, I think, a very hopeful sign that if we want to, we can restore a lot of these things.
And I think you're in a privileged role because you act as a channel basically to convey these voices through a beautiful medium of your movie to the general population. And just how do you make sure that you transform these movies and these platforms into real agents of change and not just people going to see movies and seeing a beautiful?
I don't know. That's a good question. I just try to. I'm not a scientist, and I don't consider myself a water expert. I'm just a concerned citizen with a camera, and so I try to partner with people like American Rivers and others to get the word out, because I think my personal opinion is that we need to push the needle in the public, and in order to do that, we need social media. 2 minutes. Sadly, the attention span has gotten down to about 1.5 minutes these days. But if that's the tool we're going to have to use, that's what we need to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'd like to make a commitment to you today. I mean, the reason why One Drop works the way we do, we don't do pure awareness programs or platforms, but we've tried to create fundraising platforms that generate that kind of movement and that kind of awareness. And we created one of them. It's called, you saw it in the video, it's called One Night for One Drop. And it basically gets billions of impressions every year when we do that. And I'd love to find a way to integrate your content and just to make sure that through all of our platforms and anything that we have available, that we help propel that message through the beautiful movies that you've produced. And I certainly will do that for you. Yeah, it's amazing. Thank you very much for your great work. So I think we have 1 minute left, but if there's any questions from the floor for our panelists, and we have a few. Yes.
Just read. Just
yes.
holler. We'll repeat it.
No, I think.
Just say it and we'll repeat
Just
it.
say it. We can hear you.
I've recently heard about an old application of paddle wheels being located on rivers that and generate a small amount of electricity, but they don't denigrate the rivers in any way. They take it out for a short period of time. There also are generating facilities, and Aspen has been in a big fight over a hydroelectric plant that was defeated by a vote of 51.4%. And it was sponsored by a fossil fuel billionaire named Koch, who lived upstream. Why the citizens of Aspen would submit to, because he spent literally millions of dollars to defeat this, when it's in the best interest of Aspen and the environment. But there are many facilities, and I understand cogeneration is legal, and the grid has to accept it. Is that correct? Does the grid have to accept cogeneration?
I believe they do in many instances. If I can address your point, first of all, there are many opportunities to use existing diversions to generate hydroelectricity, which of course is part of the solution to climate change. And so my organization, American Rivers, has worked very closely with the hydropower industry and with some people that would not normally be our allies on some legislation that passed Congress this past year to actually encourage that kind of development, because we see that as a good alternative to taking a wild and free-flowing stream and building a new facility on it and damaging the stream in that way. As far as I think it's the Castle Creek project goes, I know there's been a lot of controversy here about it. American Rivers was engaged in that issue through our staff based here in Colorado to make sure that the process going through the federal energy regulatory commission was not circumvented to make sure that the proper reviews took place. My understanding is that it was a close vote, but there was clearly more than just one person who was opposed to this project.
So,
My point is, there are plenty of ways to use the rivers that don't denigrate them at all. On the Columbia River in Washington, where they built a series of dams, I think 30 years ago, it was called Whoops. They were looking forward to selling electricity to the Western grid, but dams are being taken out, as I understand it. Is that right? In the Columbia River, are they taking dams out?
Well, it's funny you should bring that up because I actually cut my teeth as a lawyer working on Whoops litigation, the Washington Public Power Supply System. It actually involved the construction of 5 nuclear plants in the Columbia River Basin. The dams were built during the Depression in the 1930s, and while they certainly have done an amazing job in bringing cheap and abundant electricity to the Northwest and been a real engine for economic development there, they've also done tremendous damage to the salmon runs, which are pretty important in that part of the world too. So nobody is proposing taking out all of the dams, but there certainly has been a lot of discussion about taking out the 4 lower Snake River dams, which have been particularly damaging to salmon that go up into Idaho.
so we're getting these messages of but thank you very much to both of you, and thank you for your question. I think that we saw that from local issues to global issues, and water certainly is top of the agenda. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.